The US Embassy in Kabul has put its citizens in Afghanistan on alert after an American soldier shot dead 16 civilians. 9 children were among those killed by the sergeant, who walked out of a base near Kandahar in the middle of the night. President Obama's calling the incident shocking and tragic. Leanne Gutcher's a reporter in Kabul.
It seems that this soldier went from door to door trying to gain entry into houses and villages about a kilometre away from his base. In the first house, he managed to kill all 11 people, gather the bodies together and set them on fire.
He then handed himself in and is being questioned by US investigators. Captain John Kirby is a Pentagon spokesman.
What's not going to happen is that the mission is going to suffer as a result of this. It's tragic. It's a very tragic incident, but it would be a far greater tragedy for us to let this affect what we're doing writ large in the country.
The suspect had apparently recently suffered a mental breakdown. Neville Thurlbeck from the charity Talking2minds, which helps soldiers deal with the trauma of war.
It's virtually impossible to predict when a person will react in such an extreme way as this. It's vanishingly rare that we get episodes like this, but obviously commanding officers and medics are always looking out for signs of stress. It is almost unique, but tragic nonetheless. This particular event, although it's culminated in the deaths of these people, there are people suffering from extreme trauma, psychological trauma in the British Army all the time, and they're being treated all the time. When they leave the army, their symptoms are being looked at constantly and they are receiving treatment. And we're also talking about seeing victims from numerous conflicts, from Bosnia, from Kosovo, from Iraq, from the Falkland Islands. Even veterans of World War II still come for treatment if their trauma is still there and being revisited, sometimes nightly.
And you're talking there, of course, about support for soldiers after they've left the armed forces. What sort of support do they have while they're in the forces?
Well, they have their own structure to deal with this. They have their own medical facilities to deal with this. And they are stretched, of course, but what happens is the problems often magnified when soldiers leave the armed forces, and the more sort of challenging symptoms the army can't deal with, and they'll farm them out to the NHS. They have their own way of dealing with this. They use CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy, and it can fail. And when it fails, people find themselves being sectioned or living with PTSD for the rest of their lives. And that's when Talking2minds, the charity that I work for, tries to pick up the pieces. It uses its own unique, slightly different way of treating PTSD, paradigm therapy, and it's got a 97% success rate. We've treated just over 380 people in the last 4 years.
Just explain briefly how it works.
CBT, the traditional method, will confront the trauma head-on, forcing the sufferer to relive the trauma, which can be sometimes quite damaging and certainly very traumatic. Paradigm therapy is basically trying to see the trauma as being part of a bigger thing in life, part of the whole, if you like, not just this one terrible, isolated, very painful tumour.
You're talking there about support for personnel when they've left the armed forces. I mean, is there enough support for serving soldiers?
These guys are in the middle of a war zone, coming under sniper fire, dodging incoming missiles. They have to guard against stepping on IEDs. There is trauma happening to these people all the time, and stress is extremely high. And it will be visible probably in every single member of a platoon. You know, you'd have to have a psychiatrist on hand and a battle zone inside every platoon, monitoring stress levels at every given moment of the day. That's just not practical, and it can't happen. And unfortunately, sometimes episodes of extreme trauma can accumulate, and then suddenly you see, some person will snap.
And that's Neville Thurlbeck from the charity Talking2minds.
Breakfast, Rachel Bird and Nikki Campbell. The lead story this morning, well, the Taliban have threatened revenge for the deaths of 16 civilians, including 9 children, in Afghanistan. An American serviceman seems to have opened fire on villagers in their homes on Saturday evening and then returned to his base to hand himself in. Now, Rob Paxman is a former SAS officer, founder of the Talking2minds charity, which offers support to soldiers returning from conflict. Hello, Rob.
Good morning, Nev. First of all, we've got to say, sympathy to those who've been bereaved. It's a terrible situation. Absolutely. If this is what has happened, a man going crazy with a gun, just hell on earth. What do you make of it?
Well, if we look at the amount of time that the American soldiers are actually serving in country, some of the guys there are doing tours in excess of 12 months, some going out to 18 months and even 24 months. It's hardly surprising that something like this has happened with the amount of stress that these guys are experiencing, in the hostile environment that's built up over a period of time. It's not surprising really that this has happened.
Give us an idea of the stresses that build up. What are those stresses?
Well, obviously, being involved in combat. The stresses of not knowing when you're going to be hit next, losing members of your patrol, the whole mishmash of everything that's going on, it's bound to well up a series of emotions within somebody. So we're looking at anger, sadness, fear, guilt and hurt, and a whole series of other, if you like, corrosive emotions that undermine somebody's stability over a period of time.
This would be applicable to anyone there. It would be even, difficult as it might be for some people, to applicable to insurgents.
That's right.
Losing friends, civilians. I mean, it's what happens in war, is it?
It certainly is. Yeah, it happens on both sides of the fence. So it's unsurprising, really, that this has happened.
A government spokesman, an Afghan government spokesman, from the Kandahar government said, I put this to the military representative earlier on, a man called Javed Faisal said, if the US says this man has mental problems, it raises questions for them, as they don't register anyone in their army if they have mental problems. But of course, I suppose you would say, but they can develop.
They certainly can develop over a period of time. One man's nightmare is another man's playground. It's just a matter of time before anybody could, put themselves into the stretch to the point where they snap, and a behaviour, at any level comes out. It's something that really needs to be looked at greater in depth from the American side, and certainly from the British side as well.
Have you been in a situation where you've looked at a colleague, a comrade, a brother in arms, and thought, he's not coping with this?
Absolutely. I've spent somewhere in the region of about 15 years in hostile environments, Africa, Iraq, and I've seen many a guy get to the point when they just can't cope.
Give me an example of what happened, what you saw, how he was behaving, without obviously mentioning any specifics.
Yes, certainly. If we're looking at, say Iraq, I've seen guys over there that just their behaviours become so aggressive that they're not actually seeing what's actually happening around them. So they're if you like, they're stepping over the threshold, and everybody becomes a target. Everybody becomes the enemy, including the people that are actually working with them, and that can be quite distressing for the person that's suffering, but also for the team members as well. And then we've got to look at what happens when this chap actually gets back into UK and the effect that it has on the environment.
How did that aggressiveness manifest itself?
Well, it's just gets to the point where people, some of the guys that I've worked with, that they become so aggressive that it's an unworkable situation. Actually,
they're fighting. They're fighting. They want to fight.
They want to fight everything. Yeah, they could just become very, very angry.
They wanted to fight you, for example, and anyone around them.
Pretty much anybody around them. Yeah.
But you are required, paradoxically, in that situation, to be strong and to be macho.
They're certainly measured, a measured amount of aggression pointed in the right direction with the correct training.
Indeed, but then that's difficult to calibrate, isn't it? And therefore, is there somebody to talk to, and is there a culture where you can turn around and say, look, I'm not coping, I need to speak to somebody about this? Are there people on hand for that?
It's quite a complex, the whole scenario is quite complex. You've got trauma risk management, which identifies people that may be suffering from a stress-related condition. There are people that are TRIM practitioners that you can go and talk to. This is within the British military. It's a case of there are no interventions with that system. So if somebody is suffering, they're hardly likely to turn around and say, yep, I'm suffering from nightmares and flashbacks, for instance, because the next thing that's going to happen is they're going to be taken out of that environment. They're going to be sent to the medical officer for assessment. If they're deemed severe enough for treatment, they'll be given a couple of sessions of EMDR or CBT. And the next thing is they could very well be out of the military. So there's this tendency now for guys not to actually present themselves because they don't want to lose their jobs, especially at this time where there's, we've got a recession in the UK, there's all the cutbacks within the military, people are hardly likely to identify themselves.
Thank you, Rob. Rob Paxman, former SAS officer, founder of the Talking to Minds charity.